Hey there, this is Rebekah Koffler with Censored But Not Silenced. Today we're going to be speaking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict as it approaches its first year anniversary. On February 24, it's going to be 1 year since Putin unleashed its brutal assault on Ukraine. I get a lot of questions whether Putin actually has a plan to win. Well, as someone who spent my entire intelligence career on this target, Putin and the Russian doctrine and strategy, my assessment is that Putin does indeed have a plan to win. In fact, I described Putin's plan in my book called Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. So there's a plan for winning in Ukraine, and there's a plan for winning a broader conflict between Russia and the West, the United States and NATO. Regretfully, as a former DIA intelligence officer who has briefed scores and scores of US combatant commanders, NATO, the White House, scores of senior officials in the Pentagon and US intelligence agencies, and congressional staff, I will inform you that we don't have a plan and we don't have a counter strategy to Putin's playbook. Onto Putin's plan. So, as many of you know, Russia has launched its winter offensive on Ukraine in the run-up to February 24th so that Putin can claim some gains on the battlefield. Here's Putin's plan for victory. First, it's to outsuffer and outlast the opponent in a relentless and draining war of attrition. This is how Russia fights wars. Anybody who knows history, who has followed Russia's way of war, knows this. First, we will discuss the outsuffering part. Putin mobilized 315,000 troops as a result of his September partial mobilization. There are additional 150 troops in training camps. So that's close to 500,000 military personnel waiting to get into the fight, to get on the battlefield. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu also announced Russia's plans to mobilize 1.5 million troops total between now and 2026. That's how Russia wins wars, relentless attrition of manpower. In World War II, the Russians sacrificed 25 million of their own people. Throwing bodies and lives into the meat grinder is Russia's way of war. If you take the population of Ukraine, which is approximately 43 million, and Russia's population, 140 million, you see the disproportionate balance of forces. Okay, there's a great imbalance. That's the outsuffering part, the outlasting part. Again, the Russians think not in months, not in years, but in centuries. Okay, Putin is prepared to fight a very long, protracted battle that will last years. This is why he's mobilizing troops. This is why he's preparing the Russian population for a long game. The propaganda machine is full at work, telling the Russian people that this is an existential battle for them. And indeed, it is existential for Russia and for Putin. Remember, Ukraine is a buffer state. It is part of what the Russians consider their strategic security perimeter. Putin is facing right now his equivalent of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He cannot afford to lose this battle because the distance between Russia and NATO forces, its primary perceived strategic adversary, has reduced since the collapse of the Soviet Union to 100 miles. On the other hand, NATO is also looking at Ukraine as its strategic security perimeter. And this is why we have been providing billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Ukraine so that we can sacrifice their lives in order to protect Europe. So Putin knows that we are depleting our own weapons supplies, the United States and NATO do, by regularly sending top-of-the-line, high-tech military hardware. We're talking not just ammunition, we're talking about Stingers, Javelins, now Patriot missile system, Bradleys, and now Abrams tanks. Right now, our production capacity is outmatched by Ukraine's extremely high burn rate when it comes to ammunition. 155 millimeter ammo rounds is going to take 5 years to replace U.S. stockpile. When it comes to javelins and Stingers, it's going to take between 7 and 18 years to replace. Europe right now is already signaling to Ukraine that it cannot possibly sustain this level of support. The United States is doing the same. My intelligence sources are telling me that President Zelensky has been informed about the fact that the type of weaponry that we are providing to them in quantities that we have been providing cannot be expected going forward. And Putin knows this. And so right now, the Europeans and the Americans are conferring whether to provide F-16s to Ukraine, which will almost certainly ratchet up the conflict all the way up in the escalation ladder. How do I know those? It's because I have participated in and led red teams in scores and scores of war games. That's how we know this. President Biden knows this also. He knows that at some point, when Putin and the Russians feel overwhelmed by the conventional power that we're providing to Ukraine, he may, and in my assessment, my professional intelligence assessment, he will trigger his escalate to de-escalate nuclear doctrine. And that is why there's a concern right now in the Pentagon whether the steady flow of weaponry is going to actually produce victory. It will not. So that is Putin's strategy, to outsuffer and outlast. On top of that, the support of the American people to provide unlimited and indefinite security aid that right now has reached already 100 billion is declining. The American people are witnessing that the steady outflow of weaponry is not translating into victory, and it can't. Technology and weapons do not win wars. Strategy does. Pentagon has demonstrated again and again that it lacks strategy. We've seen this in Afghanistan. We withdrew our forces after 20 years and after losing $2.2 trillion and 6,000 lives. Okay, so and we were not even fighting a nation that had a regular army. These were, low equipped, poorly trained forces, and certainly they didn't have nuclear weapons. So that's Putin's strategy. His definition of victory is also very different from Western definition of victory. He's not about really securing a Western style victory where he would subdue the entire Ukraine. He clearly failed to unbalance Zelensky to force him to capitulate. But the Russians are using Sun Tzu's definition of victory, Sun Tzu being the ancient Chinese military strategist, who said, victory is not about killing people. It's about destabilizing your opponent. So Putin has certainly destabilized Ukraine. He has wreaked havoc on Ukraine. Basically, the Russians have been employing what it's called the strategic operation to defeat critical infrastructure of the adversary. They've been pounding with missile strikes, drone strikes, Ukraine's energy infrastructure to deprive them of heat in winter, of drinking water, and to keep them in the dark. And so this is an actual warfighting concept. Ukraine right now is torn. The industrial heartland, the Donbas region, which Putin illegally annexed. We're talking about Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. It is right now not producing anything in terms of contributing to Ukraine's GDP. In fact, the United States is right now providing the full gross domestic product worth of money to Ukraine. We have either provided or committed to provide 196 billion US dollars, and we by far overmatch what the Europeans provide. The Europeans, on the other hand, only 8 countries provide even 2% of their gross domestic product towards collective defense, with Germany not providing even 2%. Germany is the richest country in Europe. And so, again, this has not translated into any kind of victory for us, but Putin counts it as a victory because it destabilized Ukraine. It deprived it of producing anything in terms of its industrial capacity and in terms of its agrarian capacity. It's Ukraine used to be a top exporter of agricultural products on which many countries in the world depended. Well, it can't do it right now because it is torn apart by conflict. And as long as this conflict is going on, Putin has achieved victory. Why? Because its primary objective is to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. It's a red line for Putin. Again, because if Ukraine were to join NATO, then NATO forces would be deployed into NATO forces would potentially be stationed on the territory of Ukraine. Our military hardware would be stationed there, and this is a red line for Putin. So, bottom line, very different definition of victory, very different warfighting strategy. Throwing bodies into the meat grinder is how Russia wins wars. Putin is not going to stop whether we are going to take him to the International Tribunal, as Vice President Kamala Harris suggested, or whatever else, we're going to shame him or anything. This absolutely does not do anything. Next point. What I want to talk about is lack of strategy within the Pentagon. We have a one-size-fits-all approach in the Pentagon. We think that our superior weaponry is just going to do the trick. And it won't. Here's why. Our adversaries, Russia, China, they spent decades studying our warfighting style and studying our vulnerabilities. In fact, China just demonstrated to us that we have a serious, glaring gap in our airspace security. How do they do that? By studying and probing continuously. And so do the Russians. We're constantly in the reactive mode, right? The four-star General Van Herk, the head of NORAD, whose sole mission is to protect Americans and Canadians from missile strike and airspace attacks in general, admitted that we have a domain awareness gaps. Okay, so we do not proactively look at our adversary strategies and develop counter strategies because it takes years. We rely, because we're the top dog in terms of our warfighting capabilities. Our men and women in uniform do tremendous work. They're dedicated. They have exquisite training. We have exquisite space order battle, the network of satellites that provides tremendous capabilities for us that underpin every aspect of our warfighting: missile warning, navigation, command and control, precision targeting, nuclear command and control, you name it. But the adversaries have figured out how to poke vulnerabilities, our dependence on those high-tech defenses. And so that is why when it comes to war in Ukraine, it's the same kind of thinking that underpinned Putin's strategy that, again, I described in my book. Right here. This is why, again, this war is unwinnable. We can go on for another 20 years as we did in Afghanistan, get more Ukrainians killed, get more US taxpayers' money wasted. But Putin doesn't care. There's not going to be a coup that's going to drive Putin out. He still enjoys 79% approval rating, believe it or not. The Russians don't think like Americans. And so at this point, it's extremely important that the Pentagon and the White House sit down and they work out a viable strategy on how to bring peace in Europe. Because if that doesn't happen, Europe is going to be ripped apart because of this conflict. So this is all that I wanted to bring to you during today's episode. Again, this is Rebekah Koffler with Censored But Not Silenced. I am on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Getter, and Truth Social at Rebekah0132. Go on Amazon and grab a copy of my book. If you want to learn how Putin fights, what his plan is, and I hope you follow me on YouTube and on my website. Thanks for listening. Take care.